Hello and welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care must be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual practices. What does earth care have to do with social justice? For Tahmina Martelly, the two areas of concern are inseparable. In her work with a community garden, social justice means listening to the often ignored voices of immigrants and refugees.
People are not consulted about their own life, and decisions are made that affect them. And that could be in environmental realm, that could be in healthcare, that could be in education, in a variety of things. And that especially happens to newcomers in places where maybe your language acquisition is not as fast yet. But that doesn't mean your intelligence or your skills or your other things that you can give are compromised. And so I think it's really important to be able to include people in that process. And especially when you think, the environment, the land, the air, the sea, the earth that we share, we shouldn't have to be landowners to be able to speak into that because we all share this common space.
I'm Forrest Inslee, and you're listening to the Earth Keepers podcast. Tahmina Martelly's story begins in Bangladesh, where she was born. She lived for a time in Yemen before eventually seeking asylum in the U.S. and moving to a farm in Idaho. For the last 25 years, she has worked with refugee and immigrant resiliency projects and now serves with World Relief, a Christian humanitarian organization committed to overcoming violence, poverty, and injustice through love in action. As part of her work, Tahmina has mobilized a community just south of Seattle to establish the Paradise Parking Lots Community Garden. There, she works in collaboration with immigrants and refugees to improve food access, build community, and foster economic independence. At the same time, she helps people to practice innovative environmental stewardship for the good of the earth. Please join me, friends, in conversation with Tahmina Martelly. Tahmina, I'm wondering if you could tell me a bit about what you do and the people you work with.
So my name is Tahmina Martelly. I work for World Relief Seattle. I started the resiliency programs here at World Relief. And what that really means is kind of working with the inherent resiliency of refugees and immigrants who find themselves in vulnerable situations, as well as asylees and those who come here with special immigrant visas, to go beyond the initial resettlement period. And so that includes developing a sewing program for pre-literate women, as well as a teaching commercial kitchen and a community garden where people currently from 22 different countries are growing food.
And I'm wondering, how did you get involved in this? Why you at this time at this place?
Well, I came to this country as an asylee. And so being a person who's had to be displaced, because one thing about an immigrant or a person who immigrates, usually you're doing it on purpose. And then there's other reasons which if you're an asylee or a refugee, you have been displaced, or you're displaced not because you chose to do so. And so that displacement in a new place often leaves you uprooted. And so again, developing resiliency programs are basically looking at the inherent resiliency of displaced people to take root in a new place. And what are those things that will root people in a new place? So I've been doing work like this for the last 25 years in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I lived before moving here. And then, of course, here. And it's taken on different forms based on what the needs of the community are.
Interesting that you use a planting, watering metaphor to describe the essential work that you're doing. And of course, you mentioned that you have started a community garden, which really, in the best sense of the word, is so much more than a community garden. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about that. And I really want to unpack this connection between earth care and community development, because it's not a connection that's made often enough, in my point of view.
Again, community development is, looking at exactly what the community needs and asking them first. I'm a firm believer of nihil novus in novus, which is nothing about us without us, that Latin phrase. So often, a lot of times when you think about projects or ideas, that can happen in churches, in governmental agencies, NGOs, you come up with a great idea that you think the community needs without asking the community. And often that's not what they need. And so this particular project came to be because our partnership with Hillside Church. So Hillside Church is where I go to church. It's half a mile away from World Relief Seattle office. And then this particular area, this particular zip code where we are is a USDA certified food desert. That means people have to go more than a mile to get access to a large scale grocery store. And so if you're taking public transportation, that becomes really, really difficult. And so people also said that, I talked to a whole variety of people. And one of the things, people from a variety of countries in the community, and Kent is the 10th most diversity in the United States. And a lot of people said, you know what I miss the most about being in a new place? I miss food from my country. I miss having access to soil. I miss having my hands in the soil because we live in an apartment complex and nowhere near us is a place where I can grow things. Then you have to look at where are available spaces that people can get to by public transportation. Are there existing community gardens that I can refer people to so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? And guess what? There were no community gardens outside of the Seattle area, which has a pea patch program. In South King County, there's not a network of community gardens that I could refer people to. They don't exist. So that means we have to create it because the people really want it. And they wanted access to a place they could get to by one bus connection or one train connection. And it just so happens Hillside Church is uniquely situated right in the middle of town, right on a major thoroughfare on the East Hill community, where a lot of the people we place in apartment complexes can get to with a one bus connection. The only problem is it's a 1.5 acres that was currently not being used as a parking lot. So it's covered in asphalt, but the location is fantastic.
And so I think when I hear you tell that story, it sounds as if you are sometimes surprised by the implications and the movements and the revelations that come out of this project as the people engage the project, as they build with you. And I think as they even teach you more things about what this space should be.
Yeah, whenever you include the community, you have to be open to hearing everyone's ideas. It shouldn't just be a one-sided communication. It should be you're open to those ideas. And so again, the church community was really excited to be able to donate that land for use because it hasn't been used as a parking lot. And then of course, it was much needed by the community. Again, the problem is it's covered in asphalt. So how do you turn an asphalted parking lot into a garden? The very beginning, including people in that process, it's on a hill also. So I should mention some of what could be seen as problems in the site. It's on quite a sharp hill. And because the city has become rapidly urbanized, a lot of green space is missing. And so water, obviously, as you know, runs downhill. So it's a prime location where flooding can happen because it's on a hill, it's covered with asphalt, impermeable surface. And that whole area is prone to flooding during heavy rain events. But the location can't be beat because of the public transportation connection and how central it is to the town.
Mm-hmm.
And so then figuring out, okay, what should a design look like? And then where do we get money? All of those pieces. But I think once you get a good design with community input, finding money becomes a process that works in conjunction because you're solving one problem at a time. And so that's kind of this process that began. It now is because we began with deep paving. I had to get volunteers and other companies and grants to get through the process of deep paving. We've deep paved over 50,000 square feet of asphalt, which is significant. Recycled that asphalt. And then in that space, we have now 44 in-ground beds and 6 AD accessible beds because that's the other part of listening to the community. We wanted people of every ability to have access to growing food, not just able-bodied people within the refugee immigrant community, because that's a double barrier. If you're a refugee or immigrant and you have mobility issues, getting access to space to garden and getting those built, bringing in soil, and then to address the challenges of the landscape, figuring that out. Like, how can we make it most environmentally friendly and sustainable? We're capturing water from the roof. 80% of the irrigation needs of the garden comes from captured rainwater, which is also a great boon to the entire watershed. And we are, in addition to the cisterns, we have 5 large rain gardens on site. So we are mitigating over 1.1 million gallons of polluted stormwater in those rain gardens. All of those rain gardens were designed with refugee high school and middle school youth input. They even named the rain gardens. And then we had a whole series of community meetings where we included gardeners, neighbors, and others who helped us design a bioswale and a food forest, which is to come this summer. We'll be building it. That will mitigate another additional estimated about 1.5 to 2 million gallons of stormwater and the flooding issue that we talked about a little earlier. And the food forest itself is really beautiful because we're now going to be able to have food that is beyond the seasonality of a community garden, because that's seasonal. So when you have trees, shrubs, and vines that are food producing, you're able to have food beyond a seasonal growing season. That's legacy building. And the trees, shrubs, and vines were voted on by the community. So we have a variety, things like persimmon, which is hard to find in the local grocery store, different types of grapes, even a type of pomegranate that can grow here. So it's going to be really exciting.
I have a pomegranate bush that I've been nurturing now for about 4 years with nothing. So I will need to come down and take lessons, apparently, from...
There's certain cultivars that can grow here, which is kind of nice.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you, when you talk like this, again, you don't talk like a typical community developer, because when you talk about listening to people, being inspired by them, building to respond to the particularities of need in the community, you're also talking about listening to the land. In a way, the land is part of this larger ecology that includes people, but again, community development doesn't seem to be the primary focus. It's more of a balanced focus, a multidimensional focus, and that actually includes the voice of the land. Is my interpretation correct?
Well, it is community-led, but it's also looking at the problems, addressing the problems on that particular piece of land, right? So to be proactive to say, okay, there's flooding that's happening. It's covered in asphalt. It's on a major slope. It's in a major area where water is rolling downhill. So yes, those are the problematic things. So these are some of the solutions, but how are the solutions informed by the community? So yes, a bioswale is an ideal solution, engineering-wise, right, to solve that problem, and a pond and a food forest. But then what should the food forest look like? What kind of trees and shrubs and, what should it have in it? Are there art features that need to be in it? Should there be pathways? Should there be fish in the pond? Again, the science part of knowing what needs to go there from a technical standpoint of what needs to get fixed. And then all of the things, how it looks, feels, smells, and the purposes it serves needs to be all community informed, because that's who are going to be the ultimate caretakers of it and who would have ownership of it.
So it seems the land becomes center of community and becomes part of community at the same time.
And it's community led. So even though, I lead and start this project, if I want this project or any project to continue beyond me, which should be the goal of everyone, not only should I have a plan for who's going to take my place, a succession plan, but I should have a plan of the ownership so that the legacy lives beyond the originator. In order to do that, you have to have buy-in from the beginning, so it belongs to everyone, especially the landless, because so many of the people who are gardening are not going to own land for a long time because it's so expensive here in King County. And so to be able to speak to place making, to be able to speak to a place and to the town you live in, to be able to help in the design of it, the plan of it, to understand this is what happens to water when it falls from the sky. This is what happens when pollution gets picked up. Those are harder concepts, but for a large group of people to understand that because it's happening in this space and to be able to speak into that process of the design and to see it being built together, it's very powerful.
Some of the things that you're talking about, especially in terms of, say, drainage patterns and such, it sounds to me as if you're also doing some education for the things that people don't actually know about. How does that fit into the community life around the garden?
Yeah, so it's been very intentional. So this garden, I've been running internships from the very beginning. So we're starting our third growing season. So I have been here in this area for 3 years. I just moved here 3 years ago. So kind of started this project as soon as I got here. Throughout that process, started an internship for refugee high school youth. And so not only to do environmental and sustainability education with the youth, but the youth are then teaching kind of a summer camp that we have for K through eighth graders, doing science, not only place-based STEM classes, as well as kind of learning about green stormwater infrastructure, the watershed, where we fit into the watershed, why everything that we're doing, whether it's personal actions we're taking plus action we're taking in conjunction with land, why it has bigger repercussion, not only to us, but to the salmon and to the orca, and how it fits into the entire Puget Sound. That's very inclusive. This space currently is also used for seventh grade science classes for the Green Duwamish Problem Design Lab for all of seventh grade science as field trips, and we run educational classes through it, as well as like docent-led tours that are done by youth, kind of a whole lot of educational pieces that are happening in conjunction with food access and food equity, as well as kind of interactions with so many different countries and people and community building. All of that is happening all at the same time.
When you came here 3 years ago, did you come with the heart of an urban farmer, or did you catch the vision from the place as well?
Part of it is catching the vision from the place. When I saw that parking lot, I knew. I mean, you know, sometimes I just knew. We were standing in the middle of it saying, what can be done here? I'm like, this would make an amazing garden, because I know in most communities there's a need, but let me find out for real if there's a need. And then when I did some research, I found out, yes, there's definitely a need. What I started with a hunch, thinking, I bet there's a need for community gardens. Then as I did kind of research in the community, I found out, yep, there's definitely a need. People needed, they wanted, they articulated. And there was one community garden in the entire city at that time that was run by the city that was full, and it didn't have any refugee immigrant folks who are gardening in that particular garden. So out of that one garden, and they had a long waiting list. So there was a huge need.
So in many ways, the work that you're doing centering around the garden is also work of social justice, it sounds like.
Yes, environmental and social justice. Effects of climate change and environmental issues almost always affect communities of color and refugee immigrant communities the most, disproportionately high. And so those are definite intersections, because a lot of times policies and other things are enacted before people even arrive there, so that it ends up affecting where you live, where you go to school, where you work.
Where do you think your passion for social and environmental justice came from? What drives you to do this work?
I would say when I first arrived at the United States, I came separately from my family. So I was living with an American family. It was a small rural town in Idaho. English is my fifth language. So even though I could understand English quite well, my comprehension was great. I just hadn't had practice speaking it that much. And I remember a bunch of teachers were talking about me in front of me. They were talking, they were like 2 feet away, and they were making decisions about my life that would directly affect me, and they were discussing me, and I could hear them. And the whole time I was so frustrated thinking, you're talking about me, but nobody's looking at me. Nobody's consulting me. Nobody's even asking me a question. It was extremely frustrating. And I thought, and then at that time, especially in a rural town, they don't have accommodations for English as a second language classes or ELL learning. So I was placed in a class with special ed or developmental difficulties, or those who had kind of developmental issues or had other disabilities. So we were in this room, and I looked around at that room and I saw the other kids that were there with variety. One had cerebral palsy, one had, there was a variety of issues happening in that room. And I thought to myself, and I remember having this clear thought, I wonder what these people in this room have had to say about their own life that they couldn't articulate, and nobody took the time to listen to them, just like me. And that has stayed with me in terms of anything that I'm involved in. When people are not consulted, about their own life and decisions are made that affect them. And that could be in environmental realm, that could be in healthcare, that could be in education, in a variety of things. And that especially happens to newcomers in places where maybe your language acquisition is not as fast yet. But that doesn't mean your intelligence or your skills or your other things that you can give are compromised. And so I think it's really important to be able to include people in that process. And especially when you think, the environment, the land, the air, the sea, the earth that we share, we shouldn't have to be landowners to be able to speak into that because we all share this common space. Yet, most of the policies and most of the decisions are made by landowners. And they're the ones who get to often vote, or they're the often who, because they're paying taxes, they're the ones whose opinions get sought.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Not those who do not own land, right? And yet those policies or those decisions often affect those who don't own land disproportionately in a negative way. To give you an idea, if you're in a very dense apartment complex, because the tax base was going to be greater to have no green space around them, to have more dense housing, let's say city council voted for that, then you have a family of 6 in a small apartment with no place for the kids to play, no green space around them. That affects health, that affects mental health, that affects a variety of chronic diseases, all kinds of things, because those decisions were made by policymakers that didn't include the people living in that space.
I'm Forrest Inslee, and you're listening to the Earth Keepers podcast. We live in an age when many people feel threatened by others who think and live in ways that seem unfamiliar and different. Public discourse is too often characterized by tension and mistrust due to ethnic, racial, and political differences. However, when we shut ourselves off from perspectives that challenge us to look beyond what is safe and familiar, we also shut ourselves off from new ideas, as well as creative possibilities that can only be discovered in community with people who see the world differently. In short, diversity makes us wiser and more effective. We are better together. As an advocate for both social and environmental justice, Tahmina Martelly draws direct parallels between the way this dynamic plays out in civil society and how it is reflected in the ecological realm. Just as diversity is necessary for a healthy society, she contends, it's also necessary for healthy, productive gardens. In fact, the diversity of the garden has everything to do with the unity of her community. In a conversation, you made a point to me about the importance of diversity in ecology, diversity for the health of the land. And you made this very intriguing connection with diversity of perspective and diversity of people, that too is required for a healthy community, but even the health of the land. And I'm wondering how you found that to be true. What does diversity have to do with the health of place?
The diversity, I firmly believe 100% is God's plan throughout God's word. If you read all over the Bible, people of the world are God's heart. In fact, he wants his church to look like that, not segregated by language or color or race. And if you look at, even Revelations, it's talking about every language, people, and tribe together. There's beauty in that, because not only we learn from each other ideas we would never have, thoughts we would never entertain, things we have never experienced that would broaden our mind and give us perspectives and solutions to problems we've never thought of if you just hang with the same people who look like you, think like you. So diversity right there is beautiful for that reason. But then also breaking it down directly to the soil, what is so powerful is, especially in a community garden space or land use, what happens when you're growing crops is if you're growing very similar crops, to give you an idea, if you're growing things from the brassica family, for instance, which is, cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, mustard greens, kale, radish, those are all the same family. If you're growing those same things, in a period of 3 or 4 years, you're going to have usually this problem, a bacteria in the soil called clubroot. And that will stay infected in the soil for 7 to 12 years, which is really detrimental. It burns down the crops. The soil is harmed. So crop rotation is really helpful. But here's the other beautiful part about having a diversity of gardeners. You have magically crop rotation happening because somebody from Ukraine is not growing the same food as somebody from Iraq, as opposed to somebody from Nepal and somebody from Bhutan and somebody from Haiti. And so in this beautiful garden, which to me looks like a slice of heaven, all we have to do is switch plots, so you have somebody who was from Haiti growing in plot number 2, switch with somebody from Ukraine who was in plot number 13. It automatically makes us diversify our growing. And the amazing thing is people are building beautiful community with each other. We're sharing seeds, sharing ideas. People are asking each other, how do you eat that thing? What is that vegetable? And often people tell me, our countries are fighting, but we are not. And that is a beautiful thing. Often I hear people say, we don't always speak each other's language, but we make each other understood. And that is the most beautiful thing about community, right? We may not speak each other's language, but we can manage to make each other understood. I think it makes Jesus smile every time he sees that.
So I want to pick up on this idea of Jesus smiling, of your garden as a piece of heaven, and ask more about the faith motivation behind this project, behind the work that you do. How does it make sense to you in the context of Christian faith?
My job, and job as every believer, is to smell like Jesus, right? To leave an aroma behind, not a stench, but an aroma behind. That's what it says in God's word. And I think that intersection of having places for people to gather and talk, how else is somebody who's Buddhist going to know somebody who's Christian unless there's places for them to meet up and speak and talk to each other and find out what they have in common and have conversations, or somebody who's Muslim and somebody who's Sikh. And that's the beauty of not only the people gardening, but all the volunteers we've had. I've had well over, and counting, 6,000 hours of volunteer hours with a variety of groups of people who are not only learning about World Relief, us as an organization, also they're on the grounds of Hillside Church. And there's at any given work party, to give you an idea, we had one recently where I had a Sikh group who was volunteering, along with a Jewish group from a synagogue, along with a Muslim group at the same work party, along with a group of agnostics who like to get together, which is fun. And of course, a couple of churches. Where are you going to get such a wide variety of people working together because they all came to volunteer at the garden? And they're having all this great conversation. They're helping each other. And through those conversations, people are learning about each other. There's fear is being stripped away. They're having honest conversations. And that's the beginning of learning about each other's faiths, and then learning about who is this? Why do Christians do the things that they do? What makes them? Where else are you going to have those conversations? And the beginning journey of relationships.
You are clearly, as an organization and as a person, making space for that to happen. Make space for discovery of one another, for authentic conversation and exchange of views. And that, I would say, is not exactly the norm for the evangelical church in America these days. And I'm wondering what you make of that very different stance that many people have who practice both Christian faith and perhaps a resistance to questions of global warming, or a resistance to any kind of valuation that earth care is important at all.
We don't have a planet B, right? As far as I know, whether you're a Christian or not, you share the same planet. This is it, right? This is the gift we've been given. What's the worst that could happen if we take care of it? I mean, so here's the thing that I don't understand is, let's say you don't believe in climate change or global warming. What's the worst that could happen if you took the best possible care of this earth, right? And so I don't understand the resistance to it. You don't have to agree with the science backing it up. Even if you don't agree with it, why would you not want to take care of this earth? Because that's what we've been given. It makes no sense, right?
Well, you're right. To me, it absolutely doesn't. But I'm hearing the voices, the voices of the people.
I know, but the argument, usually when people have that argument, then I say, again, what is the worst possible outcome if you don't take care of something, as opposed to saying, I'm going to let that go because I don't believe this is real? That doesn't make any sense. If you take good care of it, what's the worst outcome?
Well, I think one of the bad outcomes is that you don't maximize the profit that would come from, say,
Correct. So as a believer, you're asked to, like, even the parable of the talents, you're asked to multiply it, take care of things that are given, entrusted to your care.
Mhm.
So using that and many other scriptural reference, you could say, well, we were given this earth. Let's take the best possible care of it. That means we're leaving it at least in the same state as we found it, if not better, right? So leave the place. It's the same thing. Hopefully your mom taught you, pick up your own mess. So if we are picking up our own mess or minimizing our own mess, how would that not fit into everything that God is telling us to do? And so I think where the problem is people tend to often characterize certain words with a political party instead of looking at, it's not a political issue as much as a stewardship issue. And so looking at really, what does God's word say? And then are we doing that, as opposed to, oh, I think this is either a left or a right issue? Whenever I think we tend to divide issues based on a particular party and not look at what God's word says, I think that muddies the water.
You have been talking about problems with the system, and you tack back and forth from the local and the kinds of vegetables people are planting. And then you'll talk about the systems that are creating the sort of macro problems for the city and, of course, the world as well. You, I think, have a vision for all of it, right? You care about the local, but you see the local as the means to impact the macro, the system. What does that dynamic look like in the daily life of the people you work with? Maybe the lives of the people who are centered on that garden.
Well, in everything that I do or everything I'm thinking forward to doing, you have to look and think big. So systems thinking, you have to do system thinking, and then you have to bring it all down and think small on how does it impact a person and one person's life and their actions. What does it mean for them? And then go back out again, so it's important to think big and small at the same time. So it's not enough to think of the big ideas or the big policy. You have to look at how does it impact a person on their daily living. Why do people do the things they do? And how will either changing that idea or that thought affect them? So one of the examples I'll give you is we capture water from the roof, as I've told you before. So we have 4,000 gallon cisterns per year. We're capturing an average of 255,000 gallons per year through the cisterns. So water from the roof is great for irrigation, not good for drinking. It's not potable water. So we have to do kind of a lesson in the garden because we have a variety of language levels to say, hey, you can't drink this water, or you can't spray off some veggies and then pop it in your mouth because it's water that's non-potable or non-drinkable. And then there's also the drinking water. So I know this for a fact, so many of newcomers and so many refugees, asylees, immigrants, because they come from backgrounds or countries where the water supply is not safe. So tap water is not safe to drink. A lot of times people buy bottled water because bottled water was safer to drink than tap water. So they have continued that practice after coming here to the States because nobody has told them otherwise. So they think the only drinking water is bottled water. The fact that bottled water costs more money, and over time, right, it costs a lot more money. And there is really no discernible taste difference or safety difference, right? But if you believe that with all your heart, that tap water is not safe for your family, you're not going to change that practice. So we decided, since we're going to talk about water anyway, we're talking about, hey, the cistern water is not potable and then the tap water is potable. So when you're doing, learning about water and why we're using water that's coming from the roof to irrigate, because it's saving us money and, otherwise it would be dirty. And then we also had a blind taste testing of blank bottles of water. And we had people test each one of the waters. They had to rate it for clarity and taste, and if they could tell which one was bottled water and which one was tap water. And then I had somebody come in from King County and from the city to talk about our water system and how it was safe and to explain where our water came from, what the processes it went through. And then we looked at the cost of water. That it costs $13 a gallon if you buy bottled water. And then it costs cents a gallon if you use tap water, and that the tap water is, and nobody could tell the difference when we did the blind test testing from the tap water to the bottled water. And so that whole thing, and people were like, wow, I paid that much. And then we talked about the plastic bottles, how they're also not breaking down in the landfills. That was really the information they needed, was the dollar amount. And then also knowing that it was safe for their family to drink, more than the environmental concerns at that point, right? Because they're thinking, is this safe for my family? So once they could think about that, then they could also say, gosh, we're also wasting a lot of money, and we're wasting, like, this is bad for the earth because we're buying all this bottled water. But that conversation we had to have, by thinking through the process. And then people ask questions like, are you sure that the water that comes out of the tap in the bathroom is just as clean as the water that comes out of the kitchen faucet? And then we had people from the city and the county who could answer their question and say, yes, we could even test it for you. And it is, so all of those things basically made it so that people felt safer to drink their tap water. And they're making those changes at home. That is a big milestone for me. Not only learning about the cistern water, but if I can get one family to stop buying bottled water, it's huge.
And I think your story points out the connection we sometimes ignore between culture and the worldview that we hold, and how we treat the environment. And culture often puts us in these places where we get locked into behaviors that maybe have no logical basis, no scientific basis, and yet they make sense to us according to our culture knowledge. And I will also say that as I listen, I'm also hearkening back to talking about, what would it take for, say, the evangelical Christian who resists thoughts of earth care or the valuing of earth care. I think the kind of creative teaching and experiential engagement that you're talking about would be much more effective than the kind of arguments that go on today, the sort of heightened, tense exchange of views, which just seem to polarize people and put them into opposite corners even more.
I like to liken it to people who hold up big signs that says, burn, turn or burn, the kind of like very aggressive signs about like, you're going to hell, Jesus is your savior. At least I personally don't know anybody, since I'm a Muslim background believer. I didn't come from a Christian family. I was not attracted to Jesus because of a aggressive sign that told me I was going to hell. What drew me to Jesus was the relationship and the fact that he loves me and that he comes for me. And the other Christians I knew who embodied that. It wasn't an argument. Nobody could argue me into the faith. And it's the same thing with, I think, any other issue. I don't think we can ever argue someone into any kind of a belief change. I think it has to be experiential, and it has to be incremental through example of what makes sense, one step at a time.
And I think you make a very important point that I do know that one of the reasons people hesitate to really engage in earth care efforts is because they do feel overwhelmed by the bigness of the problem: global warming, climate change. I mean, who can change that, right? But you're also giving people a vision and a belief that the small things they do, relatively small, are actually big things when taken together. I mean, you really think about this in terms of community and not just the actions of the individual.
No, it's true. It's the same thing as Kent is actually doing the single-use plastic bag ban starting March 1st. So City Council unanimously voted on that. But there was a lot of that conversation that we had to have, a lot of public meetings. And guess what? This has been before the City Council multiple times, and they never voted on it. It took multiple times before finally. And you know what? Sometimes what happens with city councils, they're like, we don't want to be the first one. We want other cities to do something first so that we know it's okay to do it. Nobody wants to be first in anything often because I don't know what they're afraid of. But part of that, again, is to know that sometimes processes take longer and you just have to stay at it. And to do that single thing, like the one time you decide you're going to bring your own cup to Starbucks and have them fill it, you're saving 4 or 5 pieces of plastic, or paper, right? Single use, bring your own mug to get it filled. You also get a break. I think it's 16 cents or 20 cents, something like that. So all of those everyday little things, they add up.
I'm wondering, I kind of anticipate the answer to this question, but it is a question we ask everyone, and that is, are there things in the realm of earth care and environment care that cause you to be discouraged, that cause you to sometimes feel despair?
There are, there are sometimes when I know that systemically, because plastic use is so prevalent, you're seeing it everywhere, microplastics and other things, and it's in so many products and so many things. Often you think, where has technology and our comfort and our ease of use brought us where every single thing that we surround ourselves is materials that won't go away, and the problems we have created for ourselves, really. And if you think about that too much, it can be really overwhelming. And you think, gosh, there's no hope for us because we've built this. We have created our own problem. If I think like that, we wouldn't take any steps. So what I like to think about, like with any other problem, like when I'm learning a language, you practice it and you get better each time and you do something new. God promises us that he makes all things new. And he's the author of creation. He's the only one who can create, whether created things and spaces down to a new heart. He's the author of anything made from nothing. When I first looked at this parking lot, covered in asphalt on a slope that flooded, it also had a stream running across it that was picking up pollution as it flooded the storm drains. And I said to God, this has to be an act of creation where you can make something out of nothing. And you begin with the end in mind and see what God can do. And often it's one step at a time. And you celebrate those one steps. You celebrate those victories because pretty soon they add up to big things instead of doing nothing.
Absolutely. Your story of the parking lot made me think also about redemption. It is about new creation and it's about redemption at the same time. Saving something that was lost and giving it new life, restoring it to maybe what God intended in the beginning.
So you'll be happy to know that the biggest rain garden that we have, the one that's about 2,000 square feet. So we have 5 rain gardens on site. So that was designed like with refugee middle school and high school youth. And they learned all about, we had sessions where they learned all about rain gardens, how they work, the 3 different zones, the different plants that can be in there. And then they were really excited to see, what kind of plants they could put in it, what kind of design. They also chose a boardwalk right through the middle. And then they were thinking about names. And this is the part, even now I think about it and I go, oh, all these kids, they gave it a name and they call it Reclaiming Home. And the reason they chose that name is that they're saying, we call it Reclaiming Home because we are removing the asphalt and reclaiming the earth underneath. So reclaiming home, the original earth, to put in this rain garden. And we also want to call it Reclaiming Home because all the displaced people who are now in this place growing food, they're reclaiming a new home. And it is a beautiful story of redemption. We're reclaiming a new home, all of the people gardening there, making a new home. And then we're reclaiming the earth from underneath that asphalt, reclaiming it to what it used to be, maybe even better than it used to be. And it's beautiful. And these kids come from all different backgrounds. And they came up with that idea all on their own. Isn't that beautiful?
We've been talking with Tahmina Martelly, Resiliency Programs Director at World Relief Seattle. If you would like to know more about her work, you'll find helpful links and resources in this episode's notes section. In future episodes, Earth Keepers will explore ways in which we can change ourselves, our churches, our communities, and our cultures to help us care for the earth in holistic and regenerative ways. We invite you to support us by subscribing to this podcast and also leaving a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. And finally, please share the Earth Keepers podcast with anyone you know who understands that caring for the earth is an expression of faith. When ecological Christians stand together, they amplify the impact of their resistance against environmental injustice and multiply their efforts for renewal and restoration. Earth Keepers podcast is an expression of Circlewood, an organization whose purpose it is to cultivate transformative communities that love and care for all creation. If you'd like to learn more about the Circlewood community or the Earthkeepers podcast, please visit our website at www.circlewood.online or write to us at podcast@circlewood.online. I'm Forrest Dinsley, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Forrest Reed is our sound engineer and the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman. Thank you, friends, for listening, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.